Hello and welcome to the Forward Unto Dawn podcast, the show focused on the fiction of the Halo universe. I am David Fuchs, aka Dangerous Dave, and I am joined by my usual cohorts, Danny.
Who's that?
And Isaac.
Yep.
The discussion for today is the book Mortal Dictata, the final installment in the Kilo 5 trilogy penned by Karen Travis. We talked about the previous books in the series back in 2011 with episode 2, and in October 2012 with episode 8. And Isaac and I also talked about Glasslands recently on Podtacular back in October on episode 396. So if you want to catch up on our thoughts on the series, there's hours of content available. You can find all those podcasts, episodes, and more in the show notes at forwarduntodon.com/FUDcast13. But that was the past, and this is now. So I guess to start off, before we go dig into spoilers and specific thoughts about the book, what are your guys' general thoughts?
Halsey's worse than the Nazis. And everything that's evil, as a matter of fact. She's that bad.
Well, I think on a slightly serious note, there had been a lot of that in the past books, and I think, with a little more time to recognize how the fans were responding to her writing, Travis could have corrected a lot of those things that weren't received as positively in this book. So I kind of went into it seeing if there would be any changes in that realm.
I'm glad she stuck to her guns because she's a professional writer and she writes what she's told to write. And that's what she did. She didn't go off on some kind of weird personal bent of inserting her own story into this. She's done what she was supposed to do.
I mean, as
the
humans say, if it isn't broken, don't fix it.
Well, if it's broken and you want to fix, don't go to her. Go to her overlords, her paymasters extraordinaire, the people who are paying her to write the story that they want written. If you want to criticize anyone for the overarching story and all the Halsey attachments, it's not her you want to go to.
Really? Ignoring the issue of Halsey. Thoughts? Keep it general.
Loved it, actually. I thought it was interesting to get some resolution on a storyline that was started 2 books ago and then was barely touched because the other books seemed too prepossessed into digging up and carrying other tat for the Halo universe rather than carrying on their own characters. Book 1 and Book 2 of the Kilo 5 trilogy were basically vehicles for other purposes. And it's finally in this book that we got to see the book and the characters allowed to be themselves and explored properly. And it does that, and it does it very well.
Yep, it was a great book, and my favorite part was actually kind of getting to explore the Kig-Yar culture a little bit more. I heard some complaints from people that they didn't like how it was handled, but I honestly don't see where that's coming from because I thought those sections were all fantastic, other than not having much payoff in the end.
That was a surprise for me. I remember reading through it and thinking, fuck, this is actually rather different and interesting. It's not just more samurai elites, and this is actually an interesting perspective that we rarely get to see, and we get to see this whole skirmisher Yig-Car dynamic going on, and that really felt fleshed out and a lot more interesting than whatever they presented in Reach for their flimsy explanations for why they exist. I enjoyed that. It added to the story. The fact that those perspectives themselves are offered and presented to the reader and they hold up pretty well for what they do, that's an achievement in itself.
I will say one thing. I really would like 343 to put out any sort of visual representation of a jackal speaking English, because I do not get how it works.
But I think right now we got our fill of perspectives from the Covenant. Or is there anything else out there that you would want to see from?
Frankly, I think seeing some of the drone society, especially when the queens are involved, would be really cool. And I don't think it would read very well on paper, but seeing the Let Golo colonies would be awesome.
Seeing them, yeah, but perspectives, I don't think they would have one.
Yeah, I don't really think you could write about that, but it's something that definitely needs to be explored a lot more than it has been already. There's still a lot of mystery in that society in the Halo universe.
See, I'm actually really glad that we got to see the Yig-Car, because if you think about the setting, like the Yig-Car have had this so-called history of being pirates, starfaring pirates as well before the Covenant, apparently before they joined the Covenant. So they have this like history of being something, and we never get to see that until now. Really, I think this was a long time coming, and she didn't drop the ball in any way. Really,
I've been kind of picturing what the Kig-Yar society has been like for since I first found out that they were pirates. I don't remember when that was first mentioned, but I just had this image of them kind of putting these scrapped together ships, functional in only a practical sense and not in a visual sense. And she kind of stuck with the vision that I've had in my head of their society. Like nothing that she explored deviated from that in any way, which was really cool for me personally, because it's like I was picturing their society the way that it actually was.
yeah.
Also, Danny, it's Kig-Yar, not Yig-Car.
Blah, tongue-tied. Shut up.
Well, I was thinking, ultimately, I was like trying to come up with a thesis for not only this book, and I guess we'll talk more about the series as a whole, but to me, it's sort of, this felt like the book that Travis was trying to write from the get-go. Like Danny said, that we got all this, we had to tie up Ghosts of Onyx, I assume, because they didn't want to have Halsey just show up in Spartan Ops. And then we had to have the Elite Civil War so we could figure out how Jewel showed up. But this one really focuses on Kilo 5 specifically.
We also needed ham-fisted foreshadowing of Didact, because that was absolutely necessary. None of the Halo 4 material before that was hinting towards him coming at all, so I'm glad that they put that in the book, just for us fans.
Yes, precisely.
I do think it was definitely noticeable that Halsey and Blue Team were absent from this story, though. Those are characters that a lot of the fans have really kind of latched onto for one reason or another, and even though we're being told that Halsey isn't someone we should be looking up to in so many subtle words, it's still a character that I really like hearing about and reading about. Whether she's a good character or a bad character, whatever, doesn't matter. She's someone whose presence in the novels I've always enjoyed. We've had like this whole underlying Halo storyline that's been going since literally the Fall of Reach, since before the first Halo game came out, and they decided to continue with those characters. And the Kilo 5 trilogy kind of jumped in and took that place, and then eliminated some of the major players, or at least delegated them to the sidelines, which it's interesting to get used to. And I think what's going to be most interesting after this is seeing how they handle that going forward, whether Blue Team and Halsey are going to be more prevalent in the games from now on, and there will be other characters in the main storyline, or if they're just kind of done with that thread.
Halsey will be. Blue Team.
End, I think, but do we want to just start digging into the story blow by blow?
Go right ahead.
Alright, so...
Yeah, I think spoilers are going to slip out eventually.
Yeah. So this is spoilers ahoy. We're just going to kind of blow through it and comment where relevant. So it starts off with flashbacks, because nothing is better than a flashback. And Travis, I mean, at least from the Kilo 5 trilogy, likes doing, I guess, flavor chapters that don't relate, or I shouldn't say don't relate, but don't tie into the style of the rest of the book. So here she focuses on the Staffan Stensky.
I pronounced it Sensky, but I don't know.
Stensky, that might be it. The man with the worst luck ever. And as his kid Naomi gets abducted and then comes back, but different. Something's not right. I was thinking that, I mean, we've always heard about the clones, and I mean, aside from basically all we ever got was, hey, we're going to collect these clones, and then in the Fall of Reach, hey, we've got kidnapped all the children, and they're just like, what's going on? And then we got in the Halo 4 Ridley Scott commercial or whatever, we got a scene of them sort of just swapping a sleeping John. So from what we learn about sort of the abduction process in this book, they really got the worst of the clone stories possible. It was not exactly subtle. They have issues, as we find out, abducting her, and they kind of replace Naomi with a really confused clone who doesn't know what's going on either. So it's not a really clean snatch and grab, as I guess I assumed that they were reading before this book.
You expecting it to be more precise up by a team of trained, only professional child thieves, or what?
Sort of.
I'm not gonna lie. I always kind of thought the abduction process was even more subtle than it's been shown at this point. The immediate image that jumps to mind when you hear the term abduction is like, you know, shadowy figures hiding in alleyways, ready to just jump out and grab kids. And I never thought that was exactly what would be happening. I thought it was a little more subtle. But then we've seen all these different portrayals where the Oni operatives are literally walking into the houses and taking the kids in their arms, like literally carrying them away. And then we also saw in the book that there's a lot of different situations based on the environment that the kids were found in, especially in the case of Osman.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense. Not everyone has a perfect, family, mother, father, everyone happy, everyone going to work, nice little regime, sleep up in their wee tight little bed. That makes sense. We're not all perfect. We don't have the whole, proper nuclear family and nuclear flipping schedules, you know what I mean? That I like how it's exposed that wee bit.
It was a nice little shade, and from the abduction flashback we get to the modern Stefan, who is dwelling on, it's safe to say that he's dwelling on the abduction just a little bit. As he builds this dollhouse for his granddaughter. He's thinking of the daughter he lost, and he ends up going out to meet the skirmisher Fel, who has a Covenant warship to sell, specifically the Pious Inquisitor, which did we hear about that originally in Glasslands?
Popped up first in Halo 3 multiplayer.
Well, yeah, it's for people who don't know, the Pious Inquisitor, and they specifically mention it with a little turn of phrase when they're going to visit the ship and they end up in midships, which I thought was a nice little touch. But it's the setting for the Halo 3 multiplayer remake of Midship Heretic. And we learn in the Kilo 5 trilogy before this that it's one of these ships that gets taken over by brutes. The elites take it back and use it to glass Voy when they're trying to stop the flood. And it ends up in the hands of skirmishers. And Stefan wants it because somehow he's going to use that to find out what happened to his daughter.
By hanging over Australia and screaming at the UNSC to tell him what he wants to hear, or he will blast them?
Well, it's not a great plan, but to be fair to him, he realizes it's not a great plan, and there's never any real clear indication what he's going to do with it besides the fact that he knows that this is a great piece of leverage.
The thing is, this character and his motivations just don't make any sense. Right, you're thinking about it, right? He wants revenge. That's the bent of him becoming a bad guy, He wants answers more than anything. So, to get answers, he's going to do crime. He's going to steal weapons and be an underground evil terrorist arms trader. In what position? With the unlikely chance of acquiring a ship, by the way, like this, was he ever going to be in a position to get anything he wants? You know what I mean? He would be obsessed with this daughter that no one believes him. Everyone thinks he's nuts. And just collecting weapons and collecting ships and maybe giving them to the self-defense force for the insurrectionists. But really, that makes no sense. You know what I mean? If you want to get answers and you're trying to do something, obviously you fight against the system and all this. You might become an insurrectionist. Yeah, I can buy all that. I just can't buy into him being an arms dealer for some specific reason, and his son being well into that as well. And
he did find himself on Phoenicia, that's kind of how everyone makes a living on that planet.
I just didn't like the setup. I didn't like the character. I thought, even at the start when he yammering on, I thought was actually no. To be fair, this whole start about the dollhouse and the abduction, I thought this is actually rather interesting. It's more human. It's more grounded than Halo usually is, Halo's usually about the grand set pieces of alien technology and the hard sci-fi and the pew-pew and the fighting and the guns. And all of a sudden we get this real human drama of this guy's just emotions and this abduction of a child, which, to be fair, could be played out on any novel in modern fiction, you know what I mean? It didn't have to be sci-fi, it didn't have to be Halo. So I thought, no, they're taking a real grounded approach to this. That lasts all 5 seconds.
Well, I think it was good to finally see it. I think it's an aspect of the fiction that has needed exploring for a long time. Like
I agree. I
I've
definitely
wanted to
agree.
see stories myself exploring the perspective of the Flash clones. Like, what is it like to be a person who has these memories that aren't their own, and they just start decaying suddenly? It's a really interesting perspective because that is a living being that is being
Have
used for
any of
something.
them survived? They always go on about the low survival rates, but what? Have any of them survived?
There was the one in wow, I'm blanking on the name. The Halo Legends episode,
Homecoming.
Homecoming, yeah, where the family is, I guess, wealthier and is able to afford some medical treatment that keeps the clone alive longer.
Oh, it didn't last. Oh, I blocked out in my head. That was like, oh, good.
Actually, I just have one quick thing to say on the abduction story. Did it bother either of you guys that they were using phones, like just contemporary, regular old phones? There was literally nothing in that part of the story that seemed futuristic at all.
Easier to hide your presence whenever you're using older tech.
I think it's just one of those things where Halo is in many ways a throwback. That they've got slip space drives, but they're also using, like you said, phones. They're firing guns with regular bullets.
Yeah, but in ODST, we had it established that at least a large portion of the population uses chatters, which, I mean, functionally it's a phone, but they don't refer to it as a phone anymore.
I think that's also just style-wise what the authors are comfortable with. Like whatever, I mean, and it's also just what gets termed a phone in the 26th century as opposed to what we think of as phone now.
It's a big galaxy too. There's different places, different levels of tech that go with them.
Yeah, I did like how they talked about how some of the colonies actually had to go out and use outdated tech just to keep things running.
Like the circuit board for the part of the story comes where they're putting BB into the circuit board. The communications relay is it? And it's like really ancient. And they comment on that. It's like it should belong in a museum.
Yeah. So it was she understood at that point that she was using outdated technology. But I think the thing is she writes as if it's a contemporary story and then inserts the sci-fi stuff as she goes. And sometimes it kind of breezes over some of the elements that should have been caught.
It is something that stands out, though.
She's mentioned in a lot of her interviews that that's how she writes. She writes as if there's no defined place or time. You just swap out the technology, and that changes the setting. So,
well, most of it. The start of the story is pretty down to earth, anyway. Sure.
So continuing on, we get Stency agrees to buy the ship and throws in an engineer. Travis definitely likes the engineer, and this one sometimes sinks sometimes, I should say, plays an interesting role in fleshing out the engineers even more. One thing I thought that was really interesting, because it came up twice in the book and sort of led me to some questions, was that the quote specifically is, "The Covenant forbade construction of AIs. Not that they didn't try to make use of human ones they captured," which later on they mentioned specifically that there's a dumb AI on the ship, which seems odd, and especially since we've got there's the AI that we never really learned much about on the Ascendant Justice, and then there's the AI on the Truth and Reconciliation we learn about in CEA. So I'm not sure what they're going on with that.
it seems like there's an aspect of Covenant history that's missing there as to specifically why it was prohibited.
I mean, I would think that some of it might just have to do with the whole mendicant bias thing. That was my thought.
Yeah,
and
that was going to say.
Also the idea that the Covenant necessarily aren't. I mean, we were all talking about when was the Terminals? I mean, that was way back in like episode 1, I think, of the podcast. We talked about it, where we were speculating that maybe the Truth and Reconciliation AI was a corrupted version of a Forerunner AI, which is why it was so vengeful, for lack of a better word. So it might be that they just don't have the technology to do anything more than
make terrible knockoff copies of...
Yeah, and the dumb AI is maybe even more dumb than the dumb AIs the humans have. It was just something that interesting came up.
You know, I actually wouldn't be surprised. I think there's plenty of room there for a future exploration of that particular area because, in my mind, what I think would have happened there is that the prophets would have realized very quickly that allowing AI within the Covenant would be a very bad thing. Very bad thing for them in terms of control, especially information control. AIs are notorious in terms of learning. They are information, you know what I mean? So I wouldn't be surprised if they, at some point in the Covenant's history, sabotaged the whole AI movement, nipped it in the bud quietly, so that the end result was just this dumb AI that we see now with the Covenant. And because we know the Covenant doesn't really progress much technologically after they initially absorb a technology, it explains why the dumb AI stuff would have been stuck around with it for a very long time as well.
Yeah, it definitely feels like there's a kind of a different thread going on because every time it's mentioned, they make sure that you know that there's something strange about it.
Yeah.
And they also, I guess, tying into supporting Danny's theories that the fact that engineers did diddly squat for a really long time, like they were cool and they repaired stuff, and hey, they took apart a car, but now they're like adding, as we'll get to later, slip space drives to spirits and making increasingly better tasting coffee.
And smooth cake.
Oh yeah, and smooth cake, which we'll get to later. So it could just be that the prophets were keeping a lid on a lot of stuff because they wanted to be top dogs.
Like, imagine, if you think about it, right, the Covenant had access to the engineers for centuries, at least, if not millennia. Do we have concrete info when the engineers were integrated into the Covenant officially? Is there any records like that?
I don't want to say that we do off the top of my head.
I don't know where it was said, is that they found them in Forerunner
Yeah.
relics, and that was it.
Yeah. Well, even if you only had a couple of 100 years with these gas bags, look at what we've done with them in a few years. Like, why didn't they abuse the living out of these gas bags to make everything as advanced as humanly possible? Because they constantly make things better, do they not?
I remember when we were talking about Glasslands, how at least I was concerned that giving them a whole bunch of engineers was essentially like making the UNSC too powerful. They specifically mention here they've limited the use of the engineers partly because they don't leave blueprints and they can make something, but then you've got to replicate it and figure out how it works. So they're great for making stuff when you need it, but you can't really mass produce stuff in the same way.
See, that's just silly in a way. Here, engineer, make a plasma energy device. Okay, there you go. Okay, engineer, make a machine that makes them. There you go. Problem solved.
All right, well that's Danny's answer to the engineer paradox. I guess the prophets never thought of that one either.
I'm just saying, like, it makes sense. Give them enough resources to make something that makes what you want. You know what I mean? It's in the end, I think the engineers are sort of a whoops in the Halo universe. They're too powerful. They're too OP. Let's just leave a few of them left. You know.
I think in the Fall of Reach, they were never established as these characters or creatures that could make anything. They just repaired stuff.
You only saw them on Côte d'Azur, or however you
took apart
pronounce
a car,
that.
put it back together. So you knew they were technologically very capable as engineers, but in terms of like devising new stuff to come up with, that wasn't really established until later in the fiction.
Yeah, it's also, I'm not sure how much of their brief appearance in the Fall of Reach was just supposed to introduce them for the game, but obviously they got cut out of Combat Evolved.
Didn't they really only start to get explored in First Strike?
Well, yeah, because the
the
Ascendant Justice was, once again, they never explained why that one was filled with more engineers than other ships, but I mean, they were originally going to be running around all across Halo as more of that ambient wildlife, and you were supposed to feel bad, like you killed puppies if you shot at them. I think that's actually a quote from someone.
Didn't they do that well enough in ODST then? Finally, bring them into the fold.
Yeah.
Yeah, ODST was great for the engineers.
Like, I thought that even the casual player would have played that game and said, "No, they're pretty cool things," you know.
Yeah. So that's we get the one thread of Stefan and Fel, the skirmisher, and the engineer, and the pious inquisitor. And then we get, as we talked about briefly before, we get the other Kigyar look with following around Chol, who's a ship mistress and sort of a galactic bounty hunter thing going on. And the mantle of, as we kind of hinted at earlier, the mantle of kind of quoting humans ridiculously falls to her in this book.
Oh god, the humans have a saying. The humans would say.
I think it was slightly more annoying in this one because it made slightly less sense than, to me at least, than Telcam doing it, and it was one of those things where you look at the saying and it's so idiomatic that it doesn't make any sense that the Jackals would quote it because it would make no sense to them.
The only
thing is, I feel like she could have very easily come up with like some Kigyar idioms that would have worked just as well.
I think the only thing that worked was whenever they were talking about the humans talking about chicken. I thought
that was I did like that.
That was perfect. It suited. It was well
because it was rooted in their culture.
Yeah, it fitted to what was. It fitted the intention of its use, but the rest of the stuff felt shoehorned and awkward and stifled wherever it was inserted. You know, it was like, God, they only keep doing this every Halo book, as the humans would say.
Well, it's the other on the positive side. I mean, I really like introducing Chol because I don't know why I guess Staten and Joe Staten and Travis agree that the only interesting Jackals are the female ones, but it was nice to have this because, like you said, they're introducing the skirmishers and actually integrating them a lot more, whereas in Bungie's Halo Reach, they brought them up and they were basically just new enemies to fight.
Tobias Buckle explored them a little bit too in the Cole Protocol.
Yeah, were they in the Cole Protocol?
A little bit. There was a mining facility that was headed by a ship mistress, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, the Cole Protocol's forgettable, so
that sounds like a passing reference rather than exploration. To be fair,
there were a lot of interactions between the ship mistress and the grunts that were kind of interesting to me.
The nice thing is they've been doing it a little bit with the elites. I mean, once again, going back to the Cole Protocol, which is like the first time you got a big push at the sort of Bushido culture of the elites. And then in these last couple books, we've gotten a bit more shading and dimension to that. I feel like this book gave us a lot more dimension to the Kigyar because we knew they were space pirates and we knew they were opportunistic, but obviously they aren't all the same. And Chol is out to saying, well, it's great that we're pirates, but it's not going to benefit us as much as having a united fleet. And I like that because, especially in science fiction, you usually end up with monocultures where everyone's the same. The Cardassians are space fascists, the Klingons are proud warriors, and every single Klingon is a proud warrior, and every single Cardassian is a fascist. And that's not realistic.
To be fair, not every Cardassian. Garrick will have your tongue out for that.
Okay, one Cardassian is not a fascist. Every other one is. But the point is that that's not... Obviously, we've got people who are communists and fascists and libertarians and everything, so it makes sense that while everyone have a common culture, that it would diverge wildly. And so I like that Chol is out doing things that is definitely atypical for her species, but she's still doing them because she's her own character, not just a cardboard cutout of a jackal or a skirmisher.
Yeah, that's one thing that the Halo universe has always done a relatively good job of understanding, at least once we got past the first initial, establishing characters within the species. And what I thought was really cool was, seeing the Kigyar perspective on their own, ancestry and where their evolutionary paths were going. And I liked how she kind of compared the instincts that the Kigyar have to collect and kind of gather resources, they're collectors because they have these bird-like instincts that a lot of birds on Earth also show, that's cool to me because I've seen a lot of that stuff in nature documentaries, and seeing it reflected in Halo's fiction in a scientifically based way is cool.
I like the fact that they didn't even try. They didn't. Not only did they not try and hide this, but they made it like a point to point out that A, they like shiny things. Whenever she uses her wee amulet in an exchange, interestingly, and the fact that like anywhere they want, whenever they want.
Yeah, I was actually wondering about that. When they first said that, I tried to picture a Kigjar homeworld, and it just was an awful image. But then later on, they go to the bar, and they describe that there was actually a latrine ditch dug outside.
Yes.
Oh yeah, for the fancy ones, they actually have a separate latrine.
Yeah. That's I love that. They're
Kind
birds.
of,
They're
it's weird to
disgusting.
talk
Yeah.
about because we're talking about defecating, but from a bird culture, it's really interesting to see that their society is like just accepting of that. Like you just walk outside and there's the latrine, and just go.
Yeah, that's funny. It was interesting because it does keep in with the whole bird aspect. It didn't have to do that. It didn't have to explain defecation, but it did. It didn't have to explain shiny things, but it did. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like how she also talks about the different kinds of Kigjar that exist. You know, the jackals versus the skirmishers versus the Halo 4 jackals. That some are more reptilian, some are more avian.
That's something I've noticed across some other media recently. It seems to be a very recent thing where they're like the Halo 4 changes as abrupt as they were. They're allowing for the past material to stand alongside it. They're not. I think it's pretty clear from recently, especially in this book, because of the what you just said there, that they want people to think, well, there's not just one species. It's not just one. It's the whole thing. We don't show you everything in the game because the games can't show you everything, but they all exist.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I think that's very important. When a game and a franchise gets to Halo's scale and designs do start changing, you can't just do a Halo 4 Master Chief and just pretend as if, yeah, that was his armor all along. Oh, aye. Yep, you all seen it wrong all these years. Yep, you're blind. You have to acknowledge the differences between the old and the new. You have to find a way to make them coexist.
And that was another thing. I mean, I kind of prefer consistency, but in having all these different variations, that's also something that's a little more true to life as opposed to just having every member of the species looks the same. Where, I mean, humans look remarkably different too. We all think that we look the same, but
yeah, we have brown ones, yellow ones, pink ones. We come in a variety of hilarious shapes and colors and sizes. You know, what's wrong with the aliens doing the same sometimes?
So we've got that thread going, and then meanwhile the Kilo 5 team, they drop first Naomi and Mal, I think, but then Vaz and Mal go undercover as disaffected UNSC guys who just arrive in town, and I think this is a good place to point that out. That this, hands down, this book has the smallest body count of any Halo fiction I can think of, and it also has way more drinking and eating and discussion of food than any of the others too. It just gets brought up a lot. They're spending a lot of times in bars drinking. It's just interesting.
Bar food, trying out new stuff.
Clearly, Travis, or the characters Travis writes, do not appreciate Russian cuisine because they bang on it pretty hard. You eat that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it could be an author. I hate saying it's an author thing, but she does bring up the whole food details a lot in a couple of instances. I do like that with the Parnkovsky and with Saren. They enjoy their foods, and I think the author enjoys writing about them enjoying their food a bit, especially ginger nuts. Every time I hear about the ginger nuts, I'm like, I want to eat some ginger nut biscuits right about now. I don't know how she does it, but I don't know. There's another UK reference, and Vaz comes from Wolverhampton.
Yeah, so can you explain what that means to non-UK people?
It's it's just a wee crap city. It is literally a wee crap city in the middle of nowhere. I say middle of nowhere, I mean it's near Birmingham, kinda a wee bit up north from London. So it would be considered the north, not as north as Manchester. But it's just a typical English town, really. There's nothing extraordinarily anything about it. But then again, I'm sure it's just like those references you see to the American towns where I say, well, so what? It's a town. And if you know off the time, you might have some more. That's kind of cool. But that's about it, really. I know one or two fans really appreciated that reference because they actually come from there. It was kind of funny. But apart from that, there's not. I don't know. I think that is the author. You know that? Just like the oh god, you're gonna see Thatcher.
Yes, we know. We're not going to get you started on that in this podcast.
Google Thatcher. Google UK perspective on Margaret Thatcher.
Halo is such an international universe. I mean, human space is such an international area for all different cultures, and it's cool to see another culture kind of explored in that way through one of the books. But at the same time, it's still so like heavy-handed. Like Nylons are all very gung-ho American, like you say, and then Travis's are all very I don't know, posh British tea drinking fun times.
Ginger biscuits
You need to
eating.
take, like a balanced perspective, like somebody who is from one culture can put that into the book, but then also reach out to other cultures and pull that in as well. Like beyond just the accented guy who yells over your radio in the game. You know, we need more than
To be fair, there's not every character in this book is tea sipping. Like, come on, that's just it's a bit unfair to say the book's entirely heavily handed like this. Like there's characters and instances through the trilogy where it's a bit heavy handed, but if you're looking at this book alone, like what we're doing, I wouldn't agree that it's heavy handed. The UKisms are heavy handed in this. They're present, but not heavy handed.
I just think you'd find that a majority of the characters say a lot of things that, at the very least, Americans would not say, if not other cultures. And then sometimes it comes across in just her writing too, not just character dialogue, but her writing, which you can only go so far to get over where you're raised. So
Yeah.
it's not something that's like inexcusable. I doesn't matter to me too much one way or another, but I think it is interesting when you look at it in the overall scope of the universe.
Can I just point out, by the way, it's to the people out there who are of a certain mind. She doesn't hate Halsey because she comes from England. Just putting that out there. I know there's one person at least probably thinks that.
Halsey's from England?
I'm talking about the author.
Oh, okay. All right.
See, I know, like, I guarantee you, one person's out there very bitter about the author being British and then hating Halsey because they think British people hate Halsey or something. I don't know. People out there are weird, but yeah, just putting that down. By the way, can we talk about the elephant in the room yet? Because I fear as if we're all la 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 dancing around this big elephant that's slapping me with its trunk. I kind of don't want to dance around him anymore. You know, it's a lovely elephant, by the way. Apart from the trunk are slapping.
We'll get to that later.
Fair enough.
Okay.
I was just asking, do you want to go on it now?
Because we're going through
dancing around it.
We're going through the whole book. The other non-Halsey parts, and then we'll get to that at the end.
The Halsey parts are everywhere in the book.
Yeah, but they're not important to the plot.
I've looked at the book. Halsey's mentioned a fuck ton according to this Kindle app.
I'm sure she is. Let's just continue on then. And so we talk about follow Miles, go undercover. There's the nice little I think it actually gets mentioned twice. The mention of them using nukes to stop the rebellion on Far Isle, which I think was originally from Ghosts of Onyx. A little passing mention. So we get lots more time on Venezia, which is definitely, I mean, everyone thinks that the first shot of Halo 4 concept art is Venezia, just partially because I think it's just an interesting place to be. Halo 5, my bad. Halo 5.
They haven't even said if it's Halo 5 yet. They just said the next Halo project.
Yeah, well, their animators give that away during the other trailer.
Yes, we know, Danny. We know.
It's supposed to be Halo 5. They changed their mind.
But they could have more than one project going at the same time, is all I'm saying.
Oh, I was shocked that they didn't.
I mean, we get great little mental images like two jackals on a mongoose, which for whatever reason is really amusing to me. And I kind of wish that you could see, like, Covenant driving human vehicles more.
Don't they run on water like pretty much all vehicles apparently in the
Yeah, they're all hydrogen.
Would you not just steal everything you could if they just ran on water? Like literally, they actually the novel makes fun of that fact that the warthogs can literally run on piss if you're desperate.
Won't run well.
No, it was actually mentioned they can.
Yeah,
that makes them so versatile and handy. You know, if you're really desperate.
Well, they also sort of made fun of the fact that they're running around with the same guns and stuff, because they have a little line about how 50-year-old rifles are as effective as ever, which I thought was a nice little moment. And so then we get, after tootling around for a while, but Vaz and Mal meet up with Stefan, and he takes him up to his ship, which we get the wonderful line about describing the Covenant interiors as the kind of purple equally at home in a bishop's office and a hooker's boudoir, which is I enjoyed that line. And then I thought was interesting was they sort of, to ingratiate themselves with Stefan, they sort of shoot their mouth about how they've been in ODSTs and they've breached Covenant ships before. And Stefan mentions that he knows all about the Flood, which I thought was interesting. We knew that the UNSC as a whole knew about the Flood, so it's interesting that word of it has spread out. We don't know exactly how much they know about the Flood, but they know that they were on Earth and that they got stopped by the Covenant.
Yeah, it never has really been stated clearly how much your average person in the Halo universe would know about that. And then if they do know about it, how much has only been downplaying the actual threat?
You know what? No, it was really weird. Because where this novel is set, and also because of when it's come out now, I actually got a wee bit confused when I was reading it timeline-wise.
The time frame is still right after. I think the closest time frame we get is they mention the last time that they were in uniform was like 3 weeks ago when they were at the Voy. So this is taking place at best in April 2553. So it's still really early days.
That annoys me. This is the only fiction that we're apparently getting. Apparently before a new Halo release this year. Apparently a main Halo release this year. That's the only little book we're getting. And that, what? It's set between 3 and 4? What? You know what I mean? There's like nothing going on after Halo 4.
Well, we do have the
apart from that stupid bad comic. Yeah. Sorry, that lovely drawn, fantastic, wonderful piece of art and pleasure to read. That's not good enough. Why are we not? Why? This book feels like it should have come out a year ago or two. Why am I reading this? It's out of sync with the comics. It's out of sync with the game. The game, Spartan Ops and everything is way ahead of this. This is all back history. I know far much more than this book does, you know? And not just from the overall godly reader perspective that normally people have anyway. I don't know. Did that not hit, or did no one else pick up on that at all in any kind of way, or was it just me being weird?
Yeah, well, I was wondering going into Mortal Dictata if it was going to be maybe set later on, but then they immediately, when I started asking myself that, I realized there's no way that they could finish up the plot threads. I mean, it had to be set when it was set, and I think, honestly, they just underestimated how much time it would take to get a trilogy out.
It was originally branded as the post-Ghost of Onyx trilogy.
But they didn't, that wasn't communicated but in anything else, like the covers, and then whenever the books did come out. I don't know, like, even, like, calling it we're calling it Kilo 5 trilogy now. We didn't find that out. That was even called the Kilo 5 trilogy until after the first book was published, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it was around the same time that the first book was published when they revealed what Kilo 5 was.
I don't know. I think it was afterwards, but whatever. It's just...
Well, what's interesting is in the past, when they wrote a novel to bridge one game and another, they just wrote one novel. Whereas this time we had, technically just one trilogy, but at the most basic level, a trilogy, which is still, that's 3 books. It takes a long time to write 3 books.
Yeah, but this was supposed to bridge the gap between 3 and 4 because it's set in that time period. It does nothing at all to address anything post Halo 4 or Spartan Ops or what the comics are leading into or the lead up to the next game. It just
That's why I'm really, really interested in seeing what they decide to do next with the novels.
Yeah, it's like they just, I don't know, it just feels like it was supposed to be one book, and they stretched it into 3 so they could do what they wanted with the first 2 books, and then they were stuck then with the 3rd book, which is essentially the one story they wanted to tell originally anyway. You know what I mean? If we were given this book at that time for the first book was given, that would be it. It really should.
The too long didn't listen version for our podcast listeners is Danny basically said, "It's not fair."
That's not a fair summary of what I said in any way.
No, that was pretty accurate.
I agree. Circle gets the square. Going back to the plot at hand. I understand it. I understand. Was there a Doctor Who reference in there? The blue box thing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just checking. Oh no. So they try and the initial plan is just we're gonna snatch the Pious Inquisitor by throwing a black box on there, and he's gonna take over everything. But he's foiled by the Huragok Sinks, who I think it's interesting that he's pretty quickly put off as like the Huragok with mental issues, because they keep on pointing out like, why would anyone leave a perfectly valuable engineer behind? And I guess it comes down to the fact that the brute ship he was on were just pissed off with him, so they just stuck him in a derelict ship. But he sort of cleaves to Staffen because he refuses to destroy some Forerunner relics. So things kind of go screwy after that, where the Fel gets kidnapped by Chol. She arrives at Venezia, kidnaps Fel, which leads to Staffen thinking that Vaz and Mal are involved. So they get captured, and then we get a nice long torture scene for them, which is always fun.
I need more defecating in my Halo and urinating and stuff, so I'm glad it was in there. Even though technically it wasn't part of the torture, that was just extra. Thanks for that, by the way.
Yeah, so they mount a rescue from the Stanley, and we get the nice little part of I Spy, something that begins with S.
God.
Where a Spartan just drops down and clocks the guy.
That's their Saturday evening action TV 8 p.m. slot. One-liner right there, yeah.
It would go in the trailer. It's probably true. That's at the end of the action trailer montage, because they have to show that there's comedy in it too. So they have the stinger where I spy something with S, and then the music cuts out, and then one-liner. But I liked it. I don't know.
A romantic comedy like you've never seen before. Big white poster and big red writing title, yeah.
But
Mortal Dictata.
They get Vaz and Staffen and Mal out of there, though not before Vaz sort of blows his mouth and tells Staffen that actually you're not crazy and your daughter's alive. Ain't that cool?
I didn't have to tell you this information. I just
That was where I kind of felt it. The story was a little weaker because it sort of felt like Vaz and Mal were not getting, I don't know, enough character definition for seeing why it makes sense. Like they both feel, oh man, this guy really deserves to know, but telling him now is like the worst opportunity possible.
But they hate Halsey so much they have to tell him. You don't hate Halsey so much that you want them to know about this secret. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense in context. I was trying to find, well, is he playing for time? Like, what's the?
I mean, he is playing for time, and he's trying to save Mal, but it still comes off, I don't know, slightly too convenient for me.
He's trying to save Mal, but what about whenever they meet up and they know each other safe? So it's like, okay, fine. They know the kind of people who's kidnapping them. They know the kind of place they're being held. They're not in any danger. It's stupid. It doesn't make sense. I was hoping for some kind of leverage there where he might have lied to him to get him to be more paranoid or something like that, so he'd make him angry, make mistakes.
Well, to be fair, that's what he's initially trying to do. He accidentally reveals that he knows more than he told him because he's trying to drive a wedge between Staffen and his son. But he inadvertently reveals that he knows about the clones, which he hadn't actually told them. So that part makes sense. It just feels a little too convenient from there.
And then at that point onwards, Steffen's a good guy, essentially. He's one of the team. Help him out.
Well, he does, yeah. It is a little awkward. They bring him, they capture Staffen, they bring him aboard the Stanley, where everyone else is. They sort of chat a bit informally, and they reveal Naomi meets her father, and there's a little tearful tit and tat. We get a couple of interesting lines going on through here. One is that we learn, we get a line dropped to Arthur 079, who is I don't believe he shows up anywhere else aside from Halo Legends, where he gets
package.
Yeah, we're true to form with all Spartans in Halo Legends. Spartans die a lot. and he gets crushed. I believe he's the one who gets crushed between two ships, trying to rescue Halsey, which isn't a great end, but
Also trying to save Kelly from the Seraph fighters.
oh yeah. I wrote down in my notes that he was the one with the anime hair. But it was nice to get a reference to that. What I thought was a little more confusing was that they mention Osmond says, well, Naomi can technically leave when she wants, but only one Spartan's retired, and that she didn't get fully augmented, which the only Spartan I knew of before was Maria, so I'm guessing that's why she's able to have kids, because she wasn't, for whatever reason, fully augmented.
It's really interesting. Why do you think a Spartan wouldn't have been
Yeah, and it obviously augmented enough to field test the Mark 6 armor.
That's a moment right there. It's an obvious mistake, or it's just this. Yeah.
Yeah, she knew that this character. I bet someone at 343 wanted her to reference the character, and they knew that the character had kids, so they knew that at some point she had to have not received certain augmentations. But as for why she didn't receive those augmentations, that doesn't. There's room for more story there, which is interesting. But
didn't they say that the Spartans have no drive for?
There, it's not quite clear. The specific symptom they mention is sexual suppression, which is one of those things that kind of.
Anything? Well, did they or did they not sterilize them? That's the question.
I don't think they necessarily sterilize them. I mean, we don't. It's one thing that they talk about here and they have brought up before, but they've never confirmed whether it's something that can't be fixed or whatever. Where is it? Here we are. Suppressed sexual drive from catalytic thyroid implant.
Suppressed sexual drive. That's it.
Yeah.
So they can still do it, but they just don't want to.
Well, I mean, depends on how getting into biology depends on how exactly the sexual drive is suppressed. It could have secondary issues beyond that.
Yeah, I know. I know.
So
that means it could also be reversed as well, technically.
Yeah, it's not necessarily set in stone. But either way, that was an interesting thing that they essentially did bring up Maria. Or I assume that they were meant to. But from there, they have this heart-to-heart time, Spartan bonding. Vaz and Stefan go to the ship where the Chol and the other jackals have arrived and cut in and been blocked by Sinks. And then, surprise, surprise, Stefan sort of betrays him and says, "Aha!" And so Sinks stops them from taking the ship again. And then Chol decides to detonate some torpedoes and scuttle the ship, and they have to bug out.
Didn't like that. Didn't like the whole, let me just activate the torpedoes.
Well, what's weird about it, to me, is we're never exactly sure if the people in the engineering bay who detonate the torpedoes can get out or not. So they might have just committed suicide doing that.
That would make sense, especially for that species.
I think we sort of touched on it before, is that we don't actually even find out if they survive or not. They sort of drop the thread of Chol and the other jackals pretty much immediately after they set them off. So they theoretically could get out because they had a way out, because sometimes Sinks sometimes was giving them an option to get out, and so were Kilo 5. But we don't hear anything else about them. Which was kind of odd. Everyone escapes, and Stefan appears to die, but thank goodness, because he's got a Huragok who just installs slip space drives for a rainy day. They manage to escape. And so the Pious Inquisitor gets destroyed, which I was kind of sad about. But they recover the Kilo 5 recovers the data that will possibly prove useful. We don't know. And then there's the denouement of Saren learns about her past, which wasn't great. And while she kind of poo-poos the fact that Halsey helped her, it's kind of clear that she wouldn't be an admiral if she hadn't gotten picked for the Spartan program. So there's that. And then Stefan sends Vaz a present for Naomi, and it's the little Starscape thing that he got for her, but she never got to see because she was abducted. And that's kind of sad and touching. And then there's the epilogue, which I thought was probably the most interesting thing about the last part of the book, because it gives Black Box, who is supposed to be this super intelligent AI who still kind of irrationally hates Halsey, but it gives us a reason for that. He's sort of subconsciously self-loathing, because we learn from the epilogue that his mind is based on a member of the Spartan 2 project who commits suicide.
Mm-hmm. Just another way of saying Halsey was so bad.
But for that part, he specifically says, "Hey, I was just one of these guys who was doing it, and the blame lies with us too."
Yeah, I know. But I can see where some people might read that as the final nail in the coffin at the end of the book. They couldn't even just let the book go. No, the epilogue has to ram it home too. It was so bad, people killed themselves over it now.
I mean, that's where we talk about like Halsey's portrayal, and I think Isaac disagrees to a point, but I think it's entirely fair. Just heavy-handed would be an apt word to describe it, because we do get, not even that we need a character who agrees with Halsey, because we definitely get the alternate point of view in some respects, because even Stefan points out, when everyone else is like, well, it's Halsey's fault that this happened, whatever, he's like, well, who let her do that? It kind of gets brought up there, and even in Black Box's comments and in the suicide note at the end, it gets brought up, hey, she's not the only one, and she's getting scapegoated for this. But it does get brought up more times than is necessary for the reader to understand, in my opinion.
Here's a thing, right? What gets brought up more often? Which one's more heavily handled? Halsey and everyone's dislike of her, or the fact that Stefan's unhappy about his daughter being taken? Which one is more ham-fisted?
I mean, I guess it's one of those things where it's entirely understandable and yet tiring at the same time, because we're inside these people's heads and we know what's going on more than them. That it's one of those things that, like, people get really annoyed if the characters don't know. If you reveal something to the audience and the characters don't know about it for a long time, the audience feels like the characters are stupid, even if it doesn't necessarily make sense. But because we've had it revealed, it makes them feel stupid and out of touch. And I think it's the same thing, that it totally makes sense that all these people are annoyed at Halsey because they've had their lives affected. If ruined is probably too strong a word for some people, like Osmond. But it's still, we've had it for 3 books. It's pretty much clear to us, and we don't need it said so many times.
I just think the thing that never gets touched on enough is the sheer level of guilt that Halsey did feel. And again, it comes down to a matter of perspective, like they talked about in the book. Like Halsey's journal was a way to fully justify.
Well, and I thought that was a nice use of Halsey's journal, because we've read Halsey's journal, and I think that's a really great piece of fiction. And well, I think it sucks that they kind of got Nyland to retcon his own work with it. He did some really interesting character work with Halsey there, and meanwhile the Oni people have it, and they can only see, well, they're like, oh, well, she's just a monster trying to justify herself in this, which I don't think is at all what Halsey was trying to do, and we know more about her inner life, so it makes more sense.
It's funny because they see it as her Mein Kampf. They see this as her admission of guilt over the terrible things that she does, and her horrifying, cold, detached perspective of how evil can operate. That's how they see it. It's fascinating, because just as fans, whenever we were given this book, it was like awesome. A behind the scenes look at the Spartan process. You know, it was fantastic, and it was detailed and handwriting bits missing, the drawings. It was really good, and to see how they've used it in such a fashion, I don't even think it's wrong. Actually, I think it fits the context of the story, the way they use it. But I can understand people who can't read properly thinking, "Oh, look at them mocking that lovely journal."
Well, and I think it's that I know Danny and I have had this talk a lot about it recently, and of course, with every Kilo 5 book, people have argued about again whether or not Travis is. I mean, to the point where they're saying, well, Travis isn't a good writer because people hate Halsey, and I think that's just bad reading comprehension. But it's another issue that I think plays into it is, as players, we know that, well, whether or not you think the ends justify the means, Halsey indirectly saved everyone because the Master Chief saved everyone, and if the Master Chief wasn't there, the Flood would have taken over, etc., etc. So it's a lot easier for us to make this determination, whereas the people who spent years in a pretty harsh boot camp training, got horribly scarred and put back together, would have a understandably more limited viewpoint, where to them they're perfectly justified, and it's hard to blame them to hate Halsey with all their heart, even if it is completely irrational and pointed out several times that it's kind of nuts.
I wish there had been a couple other Spartan 2 characters present other than Naomi, because Naomi's perspective makes sense, but I wish there were some other ones there to have turned around and said, well, you know what, it actually kind of worked for us and we kind of like it. I mean, I know they kind of did that with Osmond, but that was a little drastic. It was like she literally had no other option. But like when you look at someone like John, who was basically a bully before he was abducted by the Spartan program, he enjoyed what he was doing after a certain point.
That would be helpful, because it is, I mean, if only because we're hearing about this one perspective, and it's a totally valid perspective, and everyone, I think, makes sense for thinking it, even in a flawed human way. But yeah, like another perspective that we hadn't seen from the other Spartans would have been great. Like, we got slightly little tiny bits of that from Fred in Glasslands, but it got glossed over, partially because, as we were talking about, Glasslands and the Thursday War suffered because they were not the books Travis was really interested in writing. I think is the ultimate takeaway we can take from the trilogy.
It's just a shame too.
Yeah. And I mean, that's not even to say that these are bad books. I think they're good to very good. And
that's the thing. They're actually rather high up my list of my general. Someone asked me to post my favorite Halo books in order, and I haven't given much thought to it before someone asked me to do it, and I didn't put much thought into it. I just reacted there and then, put what I thought was my order of books. But yeah, the K5 trilogy was higher up than I was expecting after I finished writing that list.
Same for me, but I think that's because, at least from my end of it, she handles the universe so realistically, and some of the other authors, you can tell when they're writing, it still feels like a fictional universe, whereas when Karen Travis does it, it's just all the details that we know exist and all the separate games are there. They're all cohesive. They're all part of a whole large unit that is this fantastic universe.
Well, to give credit to the other authors, though, I think that's also a factor of Travis coming in as an author when 343 made it clear that they wanted to bridge all this canon together. And I think it's also just 10 years down the line or whatever, when we're talking about whatever new Halo books and games are out, I think Travis is still going to be divisive, in part because A, Nyland put so much groundwork into the series. B, he never got to finish off, quote unquote, finish what he started with Ghost of Onyx. And C, because Nyland and Travis are two very different authors who approach the same stuff very differently. Like I said, I can only think of, I didn't go back and do a full count, but I can only think of one human death and like a half dozen jackals dying in this book. It's very light on combat, period. It's very character-centered. It's not technobabble or heavily technical. Like you said, people are running around with phones. Whereas Nyland is very much more interested in these action scenes, this big space combat. And they're just completely different, I guess, catering to two completely different audiences who don't necessarily react well to the other stuff.
Yes.
So, I guess I had some stray thoughts. So, ultimately, don't agree with the people complaining about the Halsey hate, but I totally think they're justified in complaining about the presentation.
Travis is not the perfect writer. No one is. There's plenty of things that she's mishandled or didn't handle the best possible way it could have been handled. But like overall, she's a solid writer, and I think a lot of the baggage that people attach to her, they don't let that go. She's bringing that with her to Halo, and the problem with Star Wars is that it wasn't her fault there again. You know what I mean? Like, she was told to write the story she's told to write, and include facts and figures that are present in the universe, and there's franchise people who tell her these things, that you have to include these facts and figures as they are. You know what I mean? And that's the process of writing a book in a franchise. And it's the same with Halo. She has to include certain plot points, certain characters, certain facts and figures that make up the universe. And then she gets chastised for it unfairly, and it's ridiculous. And I swear it's the most stupid thing. You see this crap follow her and besmirch her like that, and in extension disrupt Halo, because instead of people getting interested in the fiction, you have people just writing it off because they don't care about canon anymore. What's this Halsey hate? I love Halsey. Dr. Mother of the Spartan Project. Why are they hating on her? 3 books of hating on her. You know what I mean? People who just see this and think, oh, what the hell? And as far as I remember, on FUDcast, Frank O'Connor was trying to not outright say, but heavily hint that we hadn't got the full story. We were getting half the picture. That there was more story to tell that would even this whole thing out with her. And I took that face value, like, fair enough. The Kilo 5 thing, setting it up, that makes sense, dealing with these issues. Spartan Ops has to put her in a certain place, I understand that. Maybe afterwards, let's see, after Halo 4 stuff, we'll get to see, maybe leading into the next game, where's this other side, you know what I mean?
Well, I think also it ties into Revenant on HBO sort of talked about how a lot of it ties into the fact that the universe has gone, not to say darker, as Isaac might say, but there's still plenty of good guys, quote unquote, but it's a lot more nuanced universe where there are less clear-cut us versus them stories, and that's just a consequence of where they're taking it, where the war is over, the fighting hasn't stopped. And so I think it's also a reaction not just to Travis's storytelling choices, but also the direction of the entire universe post Halo 3.
I don't know. I can understand where people will be disappointed that this doesn't present anything new. The novel doesn't give us any new content.
It gives us a lot, and also not a whole lot, I think, is a fair criticism.
It doesn't continue on the main story in any meaningful way.
There's no more world building in this.
Okay. Well, there's world building. There's not, I wouldn't say plot building so much. If we were going to, I guess this sort of gets into nitpicks with these series as a whole. And like a lot of it we could probably say is because they were sort of setting up 2 different stories in the first 2 books, and then this one is really the meat of the whole arc. But yeah, you're right from from the standpoint of this series alone and what we've seen thus far. Telcam was kind of a little redundant, and especially in this book, my big complaint with Glasslands was that we got these great new characters in Osmond and Black Box, and Phillips, and we got more of Phillips and Black Box in not Primordium, sorry, Thursday War, but the ODSTs in the first book weren't really fleshed out for me, and that was solved in the Thursday War. But here, we get diddly squat of Devereaux. She's pretty much irrelevant.
Background character, yeah.
Yeah, and same thing with Phillips, but he at least got his moment to shine earlier, so she kind of feels like a wasted character by the end of this, because all she does is mostly a faux hammer routine and some comments about how Phillips has the eyes for her. So that was one of my, when it gets down to, like, I loved this trilogy, but there were definitely some weird quibbles I had with it. I don't know. That's just me. Like, how would you guys rate overall the series as a whole?
I think it was really good, like I said, at perspective building, at showing people who maybe haven't delved as deep as the three of us and the other people who are listening to this into what it would actually be like to inhabit the Halo universe. But I will say, like, from a story standpoint, from a world building standpoint, I felt a little underwhelmed the whole time. I really liked the perspective, and it felt like the perfect continuation of this world that we already kind of love and inhabit in our heads. But beyond that, I mean, that was the biggest attribute to me.
I think a big takeaway from this is the fact that I think it's the first real example of showing us a new state of the Halo universe. It's not just us living in our colonies and the aliens and the alien planets. It's a mixed bag out there. You have your glassed worlds, you have your preserved worlds where everything's just fine, and then you have these oddball places where you get everybody. You know what I mean? You get these different mixtures of races and whatnot. There's jackals and there's grunts and there's humans. You know what I mean? It gives us a bigger perspective that we can have peace. You know what I mean? We can get along fine with these aliens. You know what I mean? We just have to know what we're doing. Or like with the elites, we get along fine with them as long as we're giving them weapons. You know what I mean? There's a possibility there for something greater. Humanity has a role to play which is deeper and more granular than it's been in the past. And I think we're beginning to see the fruits of that. I welcome that. I've always wanted to explore the insurrectionist movements, and I don't think we'll ever get to see that properly, but the fact that this book gives us so much more possibilities for new sort of conflicts involving humanity, and little facts about the insurrectionists being just as bad as the evil empire that the UNSC was made out to be, with that sort of detail, I find refreshing. I mop up that stuff, so I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. I think there's more potential now in the universe for more things presented to the reader, to the fan. But there you go. I'm glad it's out. I'm also glad it's out of the way. Give me the next one, please. You know?
On that subject, do you think that there's anything in these books that's going to set up for what we see in the future, or? Well,
the human commanding the elite in the comic, that's. But after you read this book, it's like, yeah, well, maybe. I can see that, maybe. Some kind of weird thing going on, maybe, yeah, somehow.
What Danny is referring to is the Escalation comic, which is currently ongoing.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting right now because with the Halo 5 trilogy over, the most progressive thing that we have in the Halo universe is Escalation.
Mm-hmm.
It takes place like the most forward in time of any other story.
And if you can get past the art, and that's in the big if, by the way, a big if. If you can get past the art, you might actually see something there. There's the next few months, the next chapters that they've said are coming out, the storyline, like there's a hint. There's like major spoilers here. There's hints that maybe, possibly, there could be the Spirit of Fire returning. Oh, that's complete fan theory based on some cryptic stuff that they're saying. But if you looked at the covers are actually expanding, bringing in some of the extended universe stuff. Like we see a vulture on one of the covers that's coming out shortly, and another one we see what we call those stupid booster frames they used in Legends, they used in space. a big mech. It's a frame they ride on, so they chase bad guys on like a
Aren't they
space
just
bike.
called booster frames?
Probably are, yeah. Well, one of the front covers shows you a Spartan on a space bike, anyway, so it does. So they're bringing in all these different elements, and like I said, like we've seen the different Banshees side by side as well, and that. So it's the Halo 3 Banshee specifically, and the Halo 4 Banshee, and there's a lot of little moments. And if you just ignore the fact that Charles Xavier's morphed into Lord Hood, you know what I mean? It's just a bit much, but whatever. It's there. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't stop me from enjoying it. I'm happy to finally see the Arbiter not be in a little hole in the ground going, "Help me, help me." You know, that was nice.
Well, and Escalation follows up on the plot threads from the Thursday War, where the Arbiter ends up at least reuniting a sizable portion of the elites.
But no mention of Telcam, who probably you'll never hear of ever again.
You never know. Sort of sum up.
That's all I've got.
Alright, so thanks for listening to the Forward Unto Dawn podcast. You can rate or subscribe via iTunes, leave a comment on the episode page, or join the discussion on the forums at assembly.forwarduntodawn.com. You can also follow Forward Unto Dawn on Twitter, YouTube at Forward Dawn. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.